Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Robert Herrick, whom I'm reading out of the Cavalier Poets, an anthology from Dover Thrift Editions, edited by Thomas Croft, who actually had interviewed me for a job once that I did not get. So Herrick is really, really cool. I like Herrick a lot as a poet, in part because maybe better than anybody else, he represents this sort of strange, seemingly contradictory set of impulses that characterize the Cavalier poets. So Herrick, as a Cavalier poet, obviously was a supporter of King Charles I during the English Civil War. He was a monarchist, which I'm generally not, but I do find myself strangely sympathetic to the Cavaliers, possibly because the Puritans under Oliver Cromwell were so horrendously, aggressively dull. But the Cavaliers were obviously extremely monarchist. They embraced decadent court life, hedonistic court life. There's a militarism, a support for Charles I's military campaigns. And yet, at the same time, they are also devoutly Christian, especially somebody like Herrick, who actually made his living as a parish priest in, I want to say, Devon. He was given the Priory of Dean in Devonshire. So that was in the 1630s, 1640s. That was way out of the way as far as English court life went, right? This was out in the sticks as opposed to being in London, which is where stuff was happening in court life. And so Herrick was really sort of away from the politics. He was away from the sort of decadence and the enjoyment of court life under Charles I, and yet his poetry reflects these themes, but it also reflects his religious practice. And we get this, for instance, from this poem, The Argument of His Book, which is this sort of catalog, this sort of cataloging of Herrick's subject matter. So this is that poem, The Argument of His Book. I sing of brooks, of blossoms, birds, and bowers, of April, May, and June, and July flowers. I sing of maypoles, hawk carts, vessels, wakes, of bridegrooms, brides, and of their bridal cakes. I write of youth, of love, and have excess, by these to sing of cleanly wantonness. I sing of dews, of rains, and piece by piece, of balm, of oil, of spice, of ambergris. I sing of times transshifting, and I write how roses first came red and lilies white. I write of groves of twilights, and I sing the court of Mab and of the fairy king. I write of hell, I sing and ever shall, of heaven, and hope to have it after all. So again, there's this sort of sense of like this. I think this sort of makes it out to seem more pastoral than Herrick necessarily is. There is definitely nature imagery throughout this, particularly in the context of love poems or romantic poems. But, I mean, the sort of wide-ranging subject matter of religious subjects. I write of hell and sing and ever shall, of heaven and hope to have it after all. The sort of religious devotion, particularly to high church Anglicanism, was central to Cavalier life. But also this sort of brides, bridegrooms, cleanly wantonness, this very sort of erotic elements to this poetry. And the poems are often quite erotic. They're often quite saucy, quite sexy, sometimes almost crudely so. So I mean, a poem like "The Vine" is one of the saucier love poems. That's not necessarily. I mean, no, it's pretty directly erotic. But this is one of the things that the Cavaliers loved. They loved this sort of playful eroticism and sexuality. So this is "The Vine." I dreamed this mortal part of mine was metamorphosed to a vine, which crawling one in every way enthralled my dainty Lucia. Methought her long small legs and thighs I with my tendrils did surprise, her belly, buttocks, and her waist by my soft nervelets were embraced. About her head I writhing hung, and with rich clusters hid among the leaves her temples I behung. So that my Lucia seemed to me young Bacchus ravished by his tree. My curls about her neck did crawl, and arms and hands they did enthrall, so that she could not freely stir, all parts there made one prisoner. When I crept with leaves to hide those parts which maids keep unespied, such fleeting pleasures there I took, that with the fancy I awoke, and found, ah me, this flesh of mine was more like a stock than like a vine. So basically, this is a poem entirely about dreaming about his penis being transformed into this. It's a little like the sort of tentacle anime porn, if you know that. It's not a thing that I'm into, but it's a thing that exists. And this sort of like phallic engrossment of the beloved, right? So the poet persona is dreaming. Julia is the consistent beloved in Robert Herrick's poetry, by the way. So the poet persona is dreaming of his penis being transformed into this sort of tentacle-like vines that engross Julia's body, completely enclosing her and exploring her body, and particularly this bit, those parts which maids keep unespied, particularly her vagina. And then the poet persona wakes up and finds that he has an erection. That's the poem. I mean, yeah, it's not super subtle, but again, the Cavaliers would have quite enjoyed that. They had these very sort of decadent, hedonistic impulses toward sexuality, as the rich often and socially privileged and powerful often have throughout history. There's other ones that are much shorter and much sort of cruder almost. So there's this couplet, 2-line poem called "Her Legs." I fain would kiss my Julia's dainty leg, which is as white and hairless as an egg. It's so strange, so awkward. I mean, I get the simile, but it's such a strange simile. Sexy, sexy egg legs? No, don't do that, Robert Herrick. It's weird, and I on the one hand sort of like it because it's weird. On the other hand, I don't like it because it's weird. And then we've got this another quite short poem, to Dianem. Show me thy feet, show me thy legs, thy thighs, show me those fleshy principalities, show me that hill where smiling love doth sit, having a living fountain under it. Show me thy waste, then let me therewithal by the ascension of thy lawn see all. It's fucking the poem is show me your vagina. And again, this is the kind of thing that the Cavaliers would have been very into. They were, again, this was a big part of their aesthetic, and yet at the same time, Herrick has all of these poems that are deeply Christian, that are praise poems. So, for instance, this one, Salutation, is about the poet persona's Christian practice. This is Salutation. Christ I've read did to his chaplains say, sending them forth, salute no man by the way. Not that he taught his ministers to be unsmooth or sour to all civility, but to instruct them to avoid all snares of tardation in the Lord's affairs. Manners are good, but till his errand ends, salute we must, not strangers, kin, or friends. It's a theological poem. The same guy who wrote a poem about dreaming that the penis became a vine that encased the beloved is like, this is the religious practice that Christ teaches us, and we should embrace that. And I feel like today we sort of tend to regard that as contradictory, right? Like we see that we I think often have this sense that sexuality and religion are sort of divorced from one another, that they don't sort of play that well together. And yet for the Cavaliers, they definitely did. And often this... So the other things that are, of course, important to the Cavaliers are things like authority. And this works in a couple of different ways. One is that they're very monarchist, and that's directly central to Cavalier identity, right? But the other is a sort of cultural form of authority rooted in classicism, right? So rooted in these classical illusions. In The Vine, we have that reference, young Bacchus ravished by his tree. That, of course, is a reference to classical antiquity. And so we have both of those impulses working here. This sort of submission to authority, whether that is the cultural authority of the classics or whether that is the temporal and political authority of the king. So one poem, for instance, by Herrick that embodies the monarchist tradition is To the King, upon his coming with his army into the West. Welcome, most welcome to our vows and us, most great the universal genius, the drooping West which hitherto has stood as one in long-lamented widowhood, looks like a bride now or a bed of flowers, newly refreshed both by the sun and showers. War which before was horrid now appears lovely in you, brave prince of cavaliers. A deal of courage in each bosom springs by your excess, O you the best of kings. Ride on with all white omens, so that where your standards up, we fix a conquest there. It's so slavishly devotional to the king, and there is again this sort of erotic element to it, right? This the west of England looks like a bride now. This sense of like the king by entering the West in both a very militaristic, martial sense of entering with an army, but also we could read this in a sexual sense, is coming with his army into the West. There's a sexual pun there. And when we think, and when the poet figures the West of England as a bride, there is a sexual connotation to that. And for Herrick, that's a great thing, right? This poem reflects that desire for the monarchy. And we see the same thing actually with so much of Herrick's more classically inspired or elusive poetry. So a poem like The Vision, for instance, this blends these classical references with eroticism. So this is The Vision. Sitting alone as one forsook, close by silver shedding brook, with hands held up to love I wept, and after sorrows spent I slept. Then in a vision I did see a glorious form appear to me. A virgin's face she had, her dress was like a sprightly Spartaness. Silver bow with green silk strung down from her comely shoulders hung, and as she stood the wanton air dandled the ringlets of her hair. Her legs were such as Diana shows, when tucked up she a-hunting goes, with buskins shortened to descry the happy dawning of her thigh, which when I saw I made excess to kiss that tempting nakedness. But she forbade me with a wand of myrtle she had in her hand, and chiding me said, Hence, remove, Herrick, thou art too coarse to love. So again, these references to the sprightly Spartaness, to Diana hunting in her buskins, these are very classical references, and yet it's about erotic desire for the beloved. And then the last thing I want to talk about with Herrick fairly quickly is another thing that he's quite famous for, and that the Cavalier poets really embraced, was carpe diem poems, or poems that encourage readers to embrace the day or seize the day, to basically pursue wine, women, and song, eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die, basically. So a poem like On Himself is a good example of this. I fear no earthly powers, but care for crowns of flowers, and love to have my beard with wine and oil besmeared. This day I'll drown all sorrow, who knows to live tomorrow? So again, it is very much a eat, drink, and be merry, for tomorrow we may die. But his most famous poem, probably full stop, his most famous poem, certainly his most famous Carpe Diem poem, is To the Virgins to Make Much of Time. And chances are, if you've heard one Robert Herrick poem, this is the one that you've heard. So this is To the Virgins to Make Much of Time, and this is what I'll leave you with. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner he will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worst, times still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may go merry, for having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry.